In the year 1406 BC, 12 spies from Israel returned from Canaan with a report that seemed impossible. They had seen Nephilim, the same beings that the universal flood was supposed to have erased from the earth forever. The flood of Noah completely destroyed every living being that breathed on the surface of the dry land known. Genesis 7 leaves no room for exceptions. Every creature with the breath of life in its nostrils had perished. Hebrew uses the verb masha to mean erase, annihilate, destroy completely and without any possible survivors. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive, according to the categorical and definitive text of Genesis. So, how is it that Moses' spies saw Nephilim in Canaan centuries after the great universal judgment? This is not a minor contradiction. It is the question that has divided theological schools for 3,000 years. Either the flood was not what Genesis claims, or something completely different is happening in Numbers chapter 13. And the answer is hidden in genealogies that no one reads, written with astonishing precision, exactly 3 millennia ago. These 12 men were seasoned warriors, tribal leaders chosen for their bravery and sharp judgment. They were not men prone to panic or exaggeration. Their leadership credentials were impeccable in Israel. However, they returned with a report that shook the trust of the entire nation to its very foundations. They said that next to those giants, they felt like locusts, small and insignificant in their presence. And that brutal comparison would become one of the most studied phrases in all of ancient biblical literature. To understand this mystery, we must first accurately establish what the universal flood really achieved. The flood was not partial, it was not regional, it was neither symbolic nor metaphorical, as some modern theologians propose. The waters rose 15 cubits above the highest mountains known on all the earth at that time. In Genesis 1, God separated the waters above from the waters below, establishing the cosmic order of the universe. In Genesis 7, those boundaries collapsed. The springs of the great abyss were opened, and the heavens poured out all their contents. It was not an ordinary punishment. It was an event of deliberate and total decreation that completely restarted life. And in that absolute decreation, the Nephilim perished regardless of what they were or how they came to exist on earth. The judgment was completely total. God's promise to Noah was fulfilled with perfect integrity down to the last living being. If the pre-Diluvian Nephilim died in the flood, the giants of Numbers 13 need a different explanation. They need a different origin, a post-Diluvian source that the scriptures themselves document with admirable precision. And here is the first crucial key that most readers overlook when reading Numbers 13. When the spies return, they say something very specific. We saw the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak who dwell there. That phrase, descendants of Anak, is the precise code that unlocks the complete mystery for those who know how to read it. The spies do not claim that these giants survived the flood through some unknown or supernatural mechanism. They are identifying their genealogical lineage, their family tree, their post-Diluvian ancestor identified by name. Consider the magnitude of what the spies reported. Not one or two isolated giants, but an entire nation of them. A whole nation of giants established with deep roots in the land that God had promised to Israel 4 centuries earlier. The cities were walled up to the sky, according to the report. The language reveals the dimension of psychological terror. But the biblical text also preserves Caleb's response, which would silence the people in an instant of singular clarity. The original Hebrew text distinguishes with remarkable precision between the different types of beings of biblical stature. Nephilim, the fallen ones, appears only twice in the entire Old Testament, once in Genesis 6 and once in Numbers 13. But there are also the Gibberin, powerful warriors, and the Rephaim, a race of giants of different origin, and the Anakim, the specific descendants of Anak, giants that several nations of the ancient world encountered in their history. This terminology is not random or interchangeable. Each term identifies a group with its own distinct genealogical origin. Modern translations flatten these distinctions by using the generic word giants, erasing crucial differences. But the original Hebrew distinguishes between them with a linguistic precision that is absolutely crucial for understanding Numbers 13. The Targums, the ancient Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible used in the synagogues of the ancient world, shed light here. They interpreted the Nephilim of Numbers 13 not as pre-flood beings who somehow survived the universal judgment, but like giants that resembled them in stature and terror but had a completely different genealogical origin. The distinction matters greatly because it radically changes everything we think we know about this highly debated text. If they were literally descendants of the pre-flood Nephilim, the flood would have failed to fulfill its divine purpose. But if they are post-Diluvian giants with traits similar to the Nephilim, we are facing a radically different phenomenon. The fathers of the early church also noted this crucial distinction, clearly evident in their preserved writings. Origins argued that they were natural descendants of exceptional stature, with no supernatural component. Augustine suggested demonic influence over certain post-Diluvian lineages as one of the possible explanatory mechanisms. Geronimo accurately noted the direct genealogical connection to the descendants of Canaan documented in the scriptures themselves. Here is where the biblical text leads us directly to Genesis 10, the complete table of the post-flood nations. 70 descendants of Noah are listed with meticulous precision in one of the most overlooked chapters of the Bible. Most readers skip these genealogies as they are names without apparent stories, endless lists without visible drama. But hidden beneath the arid surface of this text is the answer we have been seeking since Numbers 13. The solution has been documented for 3,000 years, preserved in a lineage that almost no one traces with the necessary care. From the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, came every nation, every tribe, and every human group upon the face of the earth. The text carefully outlines each line, documenting who begat whom and in which territories they settled. A lineage demands our full attention, that of the descendants of Ham, specifically through his son Canaan. Immediately after the flood, Genesis 9 records a disturbing event. Noah pronounces a solemn and formal curse. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers. A curse that would resonate with consequences for centuries. The curse was not arbitrary. It followed a serious act of dishonor towards Noah, which the text speaks of with deliberate reserve. What most people don't notice is how this solemn curse is directly connected to the problem of the giants in Canaan. Canaan was cursed. His descendants would settle in the promised land to Abraham several centuries later. And among those descendants would arise precisely the giants that would terrify the spies of Israel in that report. Genesis 10 documents the sons of Canaan with the same meticulous precision that it applies to all the other lineages of Noah. Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, and Girgashites, nations that would occupy exactly the territory that God promised to Israel. There is a connection that becomes explicit later in the scriptures, specifically in the book of Joshua chapter 15. The text describes the territory of Judah and mentions Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, identified as the city of the Anakim. Arba was the direct ancestor of Anak. Arba, the genealogical ancestor of the giants that the 12 spies encountered. Canaan begot lineages that settled in the Promised Land. Among those lineages arose Arba, the great of his time. Arba fathered Anak. The sons of Anak became the Anakim, the giants featured in Numbers 13 exactly. The Septuagint, an ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, provides details that confirm this direct genealogical connection. Ancient rabbinical commentaries trace the Anakim directly to the cursed lineage of Canaan, without ambiguity. Hebrew provides an important physical clue. The word Anak means long neck, a clearly human descriptor. It was not supernatural in its origin. It was physiological, a genetic tendency towards exceptional height in a family lineage. God did not repeat the supernatural process of Genesis 6. He allowed certain descendants of Canaan to grow exceedingly. They arose through ordinary human reproduction within specific family lines, without any supernatural process. The scriptures never attribute direct demonic activity to these giants, nor the scenario of the sons of God from Genesis. They are never portrayed as anything other than exceptional human beings, descendants of Canaan by natural lineage. When we examine each mention of these giants throughout the complete scriptures, the pattern emerges with unmistakable clarity. They always appear identified by their ancestry, always in Canaanite territory, always with specifically named ancestors. This completely changes our understanding of the narratives of the conquest of the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua. Israel was not fighting supernatural beings immune to conventional warfare or the normal weapons of the Israeli army. I faced exceptionally large human beings whose size intimidated them, but whose mortality remained intact. What happens when Israel finally confronts these giants in real combat says everything about their true nature. Consider what the text does not say. It never claims that the giants resulted from the same process as Genesis chapter 6. It never suggests that there was a repetition of the scenario of the sons of God and the daughters of men in post-Diluvian times. It simply states that they existed, identifies their ancestor, and locates them geographically with remarkable documentary precision. The silence of the text is as significant as its words when it comes to establishing the origin of these giants. The scriptures may have described its origin as mysterious or supernatural, but instead they give a name, Anak. And the lineage of Anak can be traced back through the documented genealogy to one of Noah's own grandsons. What no translation captures accurately is the careful genealogical architecture that the Hebrew text builds. That architecture connects each name with the next in a documentary chain that spans generations without interruption. Arba lived in the territory of Hebron. Anak was born to Arba. The Anakim descended from Anak in the Promised Land. Each link in that genealogical chain is documented in the scriptures with the same precision as a civil registry. They die. The swords pierce them. The stones kill them. David brings down Goliath with a single stone thrown in faith. Caleb conquers Hebron and expels the sons of Anak at the age of 85. Joshua systematically defeats the Anakim throughout the entire mountainous region of the land promised to Israel. The perfect consistency of these victories reveals the divine intention that the giants existed as a test of faith for the people. Let's go up and take possession of it, because we can certainly do it, said Caleb. Sane giants, radically different perspective. The variable was not the size of the obstacle, but the quality of the observer's faith in the same terrifying reality. 10 spies looked like locusts. 2 looked like conquerors. The giants didn't change, but the perspective did. This is what the scriptures preserve about the power of the perspective of faith in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It's not denying the obstacle's reality, but affirming a greater truth. The God who promised is greater than all. The genealogy of the giants is precisely documented. The genealogy of the faith that overcomes them is equally documented. Every victory recorded in the scriptures follows the same unchanging pattern: intimidating obstacle, firm faith, defeat of the giant. And that defeat did not come because the obstacle turned out to be smaller than it seemed. It came because the faith was greater. Hebron, the city of Arba and Anak, became the city of Caleb. The most powerful symbol was won by the eldest. At 85 years old, Caleb claimed the most difficult mountain, the one occupied by the most feared giants of all Canaan. He said to Joshua, "Give me this mountain that God spoke of." That is the language of someone who remembers the promise about fear. If the Lord is with me, I will cast them out of the land, just as the Lord has said. The condition was not the absence of the giant. The condition was the presence of the God who promised, and that presence had never failed in 45 years of waiting. They existed not due to invincibility, but because they appeared so, creating a psychological terror that paralyzes obedience. Its size was natural, its intimidation was fundamentally psychological, its defeat was inevitable for those who trusted in God. But there is something even deeper, operating beneath the surface of this mystery that the genealogies only hint at. A spiritual dimension explains why God allowed the cursed lineage of Canaan to produce these giant descendants. And it also explains why they focused with unsettling precision on the exact territory promised to Abraham and his seed. The moment was not coincidental. The location was not random. His presence in Canaan reveals an invisible cosmic strategy. God promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit Canaan 400 years before Israel left Egypt freed. 400 years pass. Israel multiplies in Egypt under slavery. God frees them with signs and wondrous miracles. And waiting for them, positioned where God promised they would inherit, are giants that overwhelm them with absolute terror. The giants were not scattered throughout the ancient world. They were concentrated in Canaan, in Hebron, in strategic areas. The giants dominated the mountainous region, the strategically elevated terrain, also the valley of Elah, where Goliath would fall. Ancient scholars noticed a revealing pattern that changed how they interpreted these encounters over the generations. That is the spiritual dimension of physical opposition, the invisible war behind the visible enemies of the people of God. And if the curse on Canaan was not only punitive, but also prophetic in its complete temporal and territorial scope, and if God allowed Canaan to produce giants not despite his promise to Abraham, but precisely because of it, the enemy does not need supernatural beings when intimidating human giants achieve exactly the same strategic objective. He aimed to instill fear in God's people, stop them from claiming their promise, and make them feel like hopeless locusts. The literary structure of the text itself reveals deliberate opposition at every critical juncture of the entire biblical story. Abraham receives the promise. Giants occupy the territory. Moses leads to the border. Giants block the entrance. Joshua conquers the land. Giants remain in resistance pockets. David reigns. A giant emerges to publicly challenge him. The pattern repeats with prophetic consistency across generations. Every divine advancement encounters maximum resistance. Every step of faith confronts intimidating obstacles designed to provoke retreat right at the threshold of promised progress. Giants represent more than physical challenges. They embody the principle that spiritual inheritance always has resilience. The serpent in Eden promised easy divinity. The Nephilim of Genesis 6 represented the corruption of that divine promise. The giants in Canaan were positioned as guardians of the threshold, blocking the people of God from entering their inheritance. The pattern reveals an enemy who studies the scriptures, anticipates God's movements, and positions his obstacles with calculation. In the valley of Elah, Israel faces the Philistines, and the entire army is paralyzed by Goliath's daily challenge. For 40 days, morning and evening, Goliath emerges to mock the army of God without any soldier responding to the challenge. 40 days, the same number that the spies spent in Canaan, that Moses spent on Sinai, that Jesus spent in the desert. Goliath represents not just a military threat. He embodies the same intimidation that paralyzed Israel at Kadesh Barnea before. That fear made them feel like locusts. That lie that giants are invincible when God has promised victory. But here is what changes everything in these ancient tales. The giants always fall when someone chooses to trust completely. Every time the people of God move forward in faith instead of retreating in fear, the intimidating obstacle completely crumbles. What happens in the natural realm reflects what occurs in the heavenly realms in a permanent and intense, invisible war. Cosmic chess reveals who trusts in God's promises despite the overwhelming appearances of the present moment. Pablo writes to the Ephesians with a clarity that resonates directly with this ancient pattern. Our struggle is not against flesh, for we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual forces in heavenly realms. The battle is spiritual, even when the opposition appears completely physical and natural before our human eyes. The giants in Canaan were flesh and blood, natural human descendants of Canaan through the line of Abba and Anak. But their strategic positioning and paralyzing effect revealed spiritual opposition acting through natural means. God did not rebuke Israel for observing that the inhabitants were strong and the cities were large and deeply walled. He scolded them for believing that the fortress could stop the divine promises from being completely fulfilled for their generation. The sin was not seeing the giants. The sin was believing that the giants were bigger than the God who had promised. David saw the same giant that Saul's army saw, but David saw something more: the proven and steadfast faithfulness of his God. The enemy studies the prophecy with the same diligence that the faithful study the divine promise for their lives. He knows exactly when God has declared that his people will advance and places their greatest obstacles at those moments. Do not waste resources on battles that do not threaten God's eternal purpose. He is calculated, precise, and strategic. That's why the giants were in Canaan and not in the desert, in the promised land and not in the land of Egypt. That's why Goliath appeared when David was about to be revealed as the anointed king, and not during the previous years. That is why the most intense opposition always comes at the threshold of the most significant advancement in the believer's life. The Torah has 70 faces, the sages of the Talmud taught, with multiple layers of meaning awaiting the scholar. The fourth level of rabbinic interpretation, The sod or mystical level sees in these giants archetypes of spiritual resistance. Medieval church fathers interpreted the pattern of giants as spiritual instruction for every generation. The fiercest resistance always occurs at the gates of the promised inheritance. That is the unchanging law of faith. Will we skip the genealogies because they seem boring, or will we recognize that they contain answers that centuries have sought? Will we accept superficial readings that leave unresolved contradictions, or will we push until the pieces fit? This depth of the text is not merely academic. It is the foundation upon which faith in the Word of God rests. If the text contains real contradictions, if the flood genuinely conflicts with Numbers 13, what can we trust? But if the apparent contradictions dissolve under careful examination, then we can fully trust the Word. David didn't beat Goliath due to strength, but because he recalled how God saved him from the lion and the bear. Past faithfulness fueled present courage. Previous liberations ensured the future victory promised by God. Caleb and Joshua saw the same giants as the other spies, but Caleb confidently declared that we can surely take possession. What the scriptures do not say is as significant as what they do say about these historical encounters with giants. The Bible never suggests that the giants possessed supernatural strength or that the Israeli victory required anything extraordinary. They are always shown as large humans whose natural vulnerability is adequately addressed by their strong faith. The same principle that allowed Caleb to conquer at 85 years old applies to every obstacle of every generation. The temporal dimension of faith is crucial. Caleb waited 45 years to claim his promise and came back stronger. The genealogies that the text preserves with meticulous precision are proof that every detail of the word can be trusted. If the genealogies are precise, the names are accurate, the patterns are intentional, then the promises are too. And if God's promises are as reliable as his historical record, then no giant has the final word. The research we have conducted reveals something that goes far beyond theology. It reveals the unchanging nature of God. He is the God who fulfills his promises in every generation and documents his faithfulness even in the most arid records of his word. It is the God who allows giants not to fail in his promises, but to reveal that faith always overcomes intimidation. God does not eliminate the giants before his people encounter them. He allows intimidation, fear, and the imposing obstacle. Faith is not tested in easy circumstances, but under overwhelming odds that demand a deeper trust. The pattern of cosmic chess becomes undeniable when we trace the entire thread from Genesis to the books of Samuel. The issue wasn't the size of the obstacle, but if people would trust that the divine promise was far greater. The pattern that the scriptures reveal about giants completely transforms how we understand our own situation today. God's promises to you are as true as his historical promises to Israel. His faithfulness does not diminish over time. His power to overcome intimidating obstacles is as absolute today as it was in every battle recorded in the scriptures. The same God who fulfilled his word in every generation of biblical history is still exactly the same God today. The spiritual battle you face today reflects the ancient pattern of obstacles positioned to paralyze faith before the advance. Every giant falls before faith. Every obstacle crumbles before obedience to the voice of God who promised the inheritance. Every intimidating enemy collapses when the people of God remember his promises and move forward without waiting for fear to disappear. David did not wait for fear to leave before facing Goliath. He moved towards him while his heart was still beating strongly. The difference between the 10 spies and Caleb was not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust in God despite it. Your giant watches you, waiting for you to retreat. Your inheritance awaits beyond that threshold that fear makes seem impossible. This question posed in the desert in response to the spy's report resonates with equal strength across every human generation. The same enemy that positioned giants in Canaan to paralyze the people of God uses exactly the same tactic today. The apparent conflict between the Nephilim of Genesis and the giants of Numbers is resolved when we trace the genealogy of the text. The Nephilim of Genesis 6 were destroyed in the flood. The giants of Numbers 13 came from Canaan through human genealogy. Each apparent contradiction becomes proof that the scriptures can be trusted in every detail they contain. The genealogies are exact, the terminology is precise, the patterns are intentional, the inheritance is real. The Word of God does not ask us to ignore difficulties. It invites us to delve deeper until the pieces align with total clarity. Your giant is not there because God's promise has failed. It is there to reveal whether you will trust in the Word more than in fear. The issue isn't the size of the obstacle, but whether you believe God's promise is forever greater than it. If this mystery has ignited in you the desire to delve into the most hidden truths of the Scriptures, subscribe right now.